All right, happy Wednesday, everybody. June is National Home Ownership Month, and our webinar topic today is all about products and systems that lead to increased comfort, efficiency, and value for homeowners. You know, demand for housing is up, but there's a shortage of skilled labor. This has caused a number of builders to turn to new products and systems, from envelopes to disruptive insulating techniques. We're also going to discuss new methods of wrapping and sealing buildings, new electronic systems that offer instant energy and water-saving feedback for homeowners, more flexible, quieter heat pumps, and we'll look at how solar PV installations can add value to the homes of today and tomorrow. Joining us today is the editor-in-chief of Green Builder Magazine, which has been named Best Residential Trade Magazine for 7 consecutive years from the National Association of Real Estate Editors. Now, by now, you have to know who Matt Power is, but just in case you don't, he's a veteran housing industry reporter who's covered virtually every aspect of design and construction. His award-winning articles often tackle tough environmental challenges in a way that makes them relevant to both professionals and end users. An expert on both building science and green building, he has a long history of asking hard questions and adding depth and context as he unfolds complex issues. Now, before we get going, I wanted to let you know about today's webinar sponsors. They are DuPont, Carrier, Premier Sips, PowerShift by NV Energy, and Henry Company. During the course of today's presentation, you're welcome to submit questions for our guest. Simply use the questions box on the right side of your screen. I'll review those questions and pose them to Matt during the Q&A time we set aside after his presentation. Take it away, Matt.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. Thank you all for taking time out of what I know are extremely busy days to sit with me for a few minutes or maybe an hour and talk about construction and all of the cool building science, innovations, changes, and new ways of thinking that are going on in the industry. I wanted to point out, though, that I am not an engineer. I am a veteran editor, covered this business for 25 years. And what I do is I go out and talk to people, and I talk to probably hundreds of people every year, including manufacturers, builders, architects. So a lot of my insights are, both anecdotal and sort of boots on the ground. But, my friend Joe Stieberek is the Yoda of building science, and I am just young Skywalker, you might say. But I try to do my best to follow in the footsteps of some of the guys who have done this for many years for a living, and I'll try to cite some of their research as well in this presentation. I want to start off today with giving you a quick overview of where we're going to go, and I put this title of 5 different ways that construction is changing, just so we'd sort of have a framework. You can just take a quick look at this, and I'm not going to just read it to you. I'm going to give you a quick overview of each section I'm going to cover. First, I'm going to talk about where the market is, why we're having the trouble that we are, and then maybe a couple of solutions that are in the pipeline. In terms of structure and insulation, I want to talk about airborne coagulants. You may be familiar with some of these new systems to seal leaks. I want to talk about some new research on spray foam and how it can be used in different ways than we knew. And also, we're going to ask some harder questions about how we insulate. In terms of wraps and air sealing, you're all probably looking at many different systems for air sealing. So how do you pick one? How do you know whether a self-adhesive system is going to serve you better than a traditional wrap and tape system or a spray-on system? And I'll give you a little bit of sort of pros and cons and hopefully help you make the call on some of those choices. HVAC, this is an area that's rapidly changing. Heat pumps specifically I'm going to talk about. I get a lot of questions from builders saying, should I be recommending these things? I hear mixed things about heat pumps. And we're going to go a little bit deeper there. We're going to talk about the whole aspect of natural gas versus electric, and get into that from a bigger picture perspective too. Smart home comes of age. What I'm going to talk about are the way that smart home is now accessible in a way that it wasn't 20 years ago, and the market is really exploding. And where should you jump in? And should you jump in to this smart home craze, what are the sort of white spaces for builders and architects and professionals to get involved? And finally, we can't leave out zero net energy mandates. Codes are changing. This is a big code year with a bunch of codes being sort of decided that are going to affect energy mandates for new homes and new multifamilies. So we're going to talk about what zero net energy means to you and where you need to educate yourself and get involved in that process. So let's get going. Okay, triple troubles, the big three. Labor, you're all aware, I'm sure you're all having trouble filling slots, right? There's something like 200,000 openings in the building industry right now for especially sort of the unspecified, sort of lower, I hate to use the word lower level, but the laborers perhaps who are not, skilled trades. They're the people who do a lot of the roofing, the framing, etc. Land, of course, the pressure on land is intense. We hear this from both the big builders and the small builders. I live in Portland, Maine. There was, I think, one lot for sale a couple months ago close to town. It was $90,000. It was a tiny lot, and it was the only one available within the city limits. So that just gives you just a snapshot, and I'm sure the same type of thing is happening in your area. Materials, there have been some rises in material pricing. We're going to talk about that a little bit, and some of that has eased off, and we'll look into that in a little more detail. And I just wanted to mention that there are other aspects, which I'm not going to get into too much, that are having an effect on your livelihood and especially building codes. Extreme weather, I can give you the example of Florida, how the building codes changed there after the hurricanes. Well, you're going to see the same thing in California with the wildfires, and it's already happening. They're already looking at wildfire-specific code changes out there. NIMBYism, I think this is a population pressure issue, but what's the effect that it has on the building industry is a development that used to take 2.5, 3 years to plan out and break ground now takes 7. So it does have a major impact, and of course, on price. And so what we've got nationally is a top-heavy inventory, meaning we've got a lot of rental stock, a lot of large houses at the top. And honestly, I sort of defend builders when they get criticized for this, but it is because of all these pressures, it's very hard to make money building what they call entry-level or even market-rate homes now. That whole area has sort of been handed off to the nonprofit sector. You see my statistics here. The second one about millennials, 26% of adults were aged 25 to 34 are living with parents or relatives. The reason I put this in there is I think that there's this perception that millennials are going to save the market somehow, and they are going to somehow keep the housing market steady and robust. But really, most of the market is above their price range, and a lot of the sales that are happening are second homes. They're upgraded homes for people, and the largest buying audience right now I think is above 65. So the millennials are not yet shaping up to be that housing sort of juggernaut that I think sometimes you hear that they're going to come and save us. And the biggest issue, of course, is laborers. Housing starts just picked up again from where they were in April 2009. They're almost twice that. But like I mentioned, we're down 40% since 2011 in our non-supervisory workers. Now, this is a little bit blurry, this chart, but I wanted to show you, this is a little bit older, but I checked and the numbers haven't changed much, immigrant labor. And I think this is, sort of, I don't want to get too much into the political arena, but there is a lot of stress in the immigrant community right now. And so you are seeing numbers drop off of immigrant labor. And I think especially some of these categories, like look at the roofing category, 43.5% of roofers is the immigrants' share in that category. So you can see, as we lose immigrant workers in the construction industry, it has an intense impact on the ability to both to finish houses and the final cost of new homes. This is just one example in Dallas. This is the Dallas HVAC president, Phil Crone. He said the labor shortage is adding about $6,000 in 2 months to complete each new home. Okay, let's talk about touch on material shortages. Again, there's a little bit of politics in here, but those tariffs that Mr. Trump enacted, I guess, last year, the Canadian lumber, have had the biggest impact. So you see at the top of the chart there, 31%, this is the percent of respondents who say there's a problem. So 31% of builders report they're having trouble getting framing lumber. And you see it goes down. I mean, some stuff, vinyl siding, no problem. And interestingly, things like cement, which are another commodity product, down towards the bottom there. So there was, a couple of years ago, I think there was some cement shortages. Cement seems to have bounced back. A lot of stuff has bounced back. But these sort of key materials, especially for, and this is a key thing, conventional framed houses, you're seeing trouble getting these materials. Okay, this is just, this was the NAHB actually complaining about the lumber tariffs. They say it adds $9,000 to a new house. So I guess the silver lining of both the labor pressure and the material pressures is that alternative systems such as ICFs and SIPs are getting a much harder look from builders. And I apologize, I always sort of get in trouble with these things for leaving out. I know there's a lot of other alternative systems such as, straw bale and, earth sheltered homes and on and on. So I don't mean to, give them the short end of the stick, but we certainly know they're there. They are a small part of the overall portfolio of the market, so I don't usually spend a lot of time on this, and it's also a little easier for me to get the numbers on these more familiar ones. When you look at these, compare the numbers here. I looked at 3 different studies of 2,500 square foot home costs, looking specifically at labor. So for the conventional 2x6, they estimated the dry-in period at about 6 weeks. For ICFs, this is a HUD study. They estimate the total cost to use a ICF system about $7,000 more than stick frame. And for SIPs, they actually did quite well. It said builders saved an average of 9 days per home on framing and inspection time. And of course, rolled into that are all of the other details, and I'm going to touch on those and how different systems, the details really matter. So ICFs, I like ICFs. They're they're sturdy, resilient material, great for high wind zones, super insulating. They have a lot going for them. What I have heard a lot though from people who use ICFs is that there are a lot of hidden costs in ICFs, and I just sort of made a list. On this top part here is the list of the things that you want to consider before you just jump into an ICF system. If you're like me, you can drive around here in southern Maine where I live, and you'll often see these sort of half-built ICF homes, and those are DIY jobs, because I think the DIYers think, well, these are just styrofoam blocks. We can just stack these things up and build it ourselves. But what I think actually slows them down are these details. So they start stacking things, and they realize they have to have special, bolts and clips and ledger systems and so on to complete the system. So I would say take a good hard look. And I also think that each ICF system has its own nuances. Some of them take these things like window framing into account better than others. So check with their specifications and look for the ones that have the least sort of details that they leave to you to do on the job site, and you'll be happier with the end result. And in terms of offsets, I guess what I mean are what are some of the other perks that you get by building with DIYs? You do get insurance discounts, which is usually passed on to the homeowner. I also wanted to mention, if you have an experienced crew, meaning you can get people who are familiar with ICFs, that actually shaves quite a lot off the cost of using ICFs. So it really does matter whether you're starting with a bare bones, uneducated crew or somebody who's done this before. SIPs, I think, have a lot going for them. They are a little bit subject to the OSB, shortages, but because they buy in bulk and they, they can plan out their purchases, they have a little more flexibility in terms of not being hit so hard with those material cost shortages. One of the big savings that sort of are often overlooked with SIPs are that they're pre-cut. So essentially, you're buying depending on which company you get them from a pre-cut package. Premier SIPs, I believe, not sure if they do exclusively pre-cut, but I know they do offer pre-cuts, and they'll have pre-cut chases for your electrical work. Each one of these things that's done, in the factory is saving you labor on the job site. So the rough estimate is that even though you're going to spend a little more than a stick framing, like about 20%, your total project cost can be up to 30% less. And of course, you're going to be able to put it up a lot faster. I mean, the caveats with SIPs is that you do want to store them carefully. I'm sure you've heard horror stories about people who just leave them laying out in the rain. There's some pretty clear guidelines about how to store them so you never have, those kind of problems. So bottom line, and this is what I'm going to do with each section, is what do you need to take away from this? This top line, stricter codes make baseline performance difference less of a factor. So what I mean by that is whether you are building with stick frame, ICFs, or SIPs, codes are becoming stricter, and especially in places like Florida, which have already sort of crossed over, and certainly California with Title 24. The type of building envelope is, in my mind, less important than the execution of it. So you can still create a net zero building with just about any of the systems out there. You just have to take into account all the details and make sure that it's done right. And that wasn't always the case. I think that, in the past, when we used to build, stick frame houses out of 2x4s with very little air sealing, that you could certainly not compare them with a SIP. A SIP was far superior, whereas now a properly built stick framed house can compete, at least on many levels, with a SIP's performance. Fewer details. I would always opt for fewer details in this age of labor, lack of labor, more hours saved, and less opportunity for error. Labor savings is driving the bus. Okay, let's talk about air sealing and some of the stuff that's going on. It's often a little bit confusing even for us trying to keep track, because some of the companies are actually changing quite rapidly. So air sealing, there's been a lot of research over the past 10 years or so, and what we now know is that when air gets into an insulation cavity, that greatly decreases the insulating value of the wall system. So it's critical to keep air movement out of the walls. So this next one, this 1,000 cuts sealing techniques, I picked that up from a quote where somebody once said that, trying to seal a building, the problem is it's like death by 1,000 cuts. Well, there are new technologies that take that into account and actually help you on the site to get rid of that problem. Resilience, I'm not going to give that one away, but I'm going to talk about spray foam and how spray foam has some qualities that we hadn't really thought about. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on some insulation research and some of these sort of outlying bleeding edge technology of vacuum insulation technology. And I just brushed over this already, but we know that moisture in the walls matters. Wet insulation loses performance, so does air movement. So that's what we want to prevent. Let's keep the walls dry. Let's keep the air out of them. So I thought I'd give you some sort of benchmarks. Zero energy homes or net zero energy homes, 1 to 2 air changes per hour is the benchmark that I'd like to see us maybe talk about today. Getting to that, and I'm going to sort of foreshadow where I'm going with these air settings, you can basically get to 1 to 2 air changes per hour with any good sealing system, any type of sealing system. It is harder to get to the passive house standard. You really have to get everything perfect to get the passive house. And if you've built passive house, you know what I'm talking about. The old school 2010 house that had 8 to 10 air changes per hour, that is long gone. So now we're even the sort of casually built house today is getting half of that. So, and this infers that there will be some form of mechanical ventilation to support that house if you're getting down as low as 1 to 2 air changes per hour. Now, these are what I'm talking about, these airborne air barriers. This one's from AeroSeal. Now, AeroSeal has just gotten into a strategic alliance with, they've just entered a strategic alliance, and this is the old. On the left is the Energy Complete system, which you don't see much of. And I heard anecdotally that the cost for the equipment and stuff was making it a slow sell to the industry. AeroSeal, which I couldn't remember who they were allied with, but it was Owens Corning. So they're partnering with Owens Corning. So now you can do fiberglass bats, and what this does is creates a low pressure system that pulls these particles through the house and fills in all of those little missing gaps and cracks. And so it's actually the fiberglass insulation companies, as you can imagine, their main competitor is spray foam at the moment. So they're trying to figure out how can they get the same level of air sealing. And this Energy Complete was one idea on the left, and it worked quite well. But like I said, I think there were barriers to in the cost. AeroSeal may be the answer because it gets them up there in the same sealing range with spray foam. So they're much more competitive, yet still at a lower price point overall. Now, this I was talking about spray foam Perks. The University of Florida, Gainesville, which is actually my alma mater where I went to journalism school, they have a great program there where they research what happens to buildings in different situations. And they discovered that when you spray foam the ceilings or the attics in houses, you increase the roof uplift resistance by 200% or more. Now, so far, this has not been written into the building codes, but I think my prediction is this will actually become part of some of these at-risk areas building codes, because it's a real challenge retrofitting old homes. And I think there's probably close to 1 million of these unretrofitted homes in Florida alone that have roofs that were built before the new code. So this is a way to go in and, without ripping the entire roof off, retrofit it. And honestly, I wish some builder groups would get behind this and push with local jurisdictions and code agencies maybe to get a stretch code for this, so that this could become a way to meet some of the stricter wind uplift codes. And I think it's a great solution for that. Now, my friend Tom Dugan, who's in North Carolina and is an engineer and a builder, has been sending me a lot of stuff lately about insulation, and he's sort of challenging the status quo about insulation. I thought this one especially was interesting. He, in some of his analysis, he points out that insulation, once you get past, the first couple inches of insulation, the return in terms of R value drops off really rapidly. So if you look on this chart with the blue, as you get up to, like about R12, right? You're starting to adding more insulation you're just getting a slight gain. I'm not saying you're not getting any, but you're getting a slight gain. And you know how the IRC, let's look on the next slide. So the numbers are similar, the requirements for attic ventilation on 2018, but this is the IRC 2006. Northern climates over there where I am on the right is R49, right? Now let's go back to that chart for a minute. So R40, by the time you get up to R40, your gains have really flattened out, right? So it's a very, very minimal impact. You know, and I'll often see builders will write in and they'll enter a home in one of our contests and they'll say, we have R58 in the attic. Well, you have to wonder if this chart information is accurate. Is R58 really mean anything? Is it really doing anything? Right? Now, one thing I did want to bring up is there actually probably is a reason to go to these deeper, like blown-in insulations like the R38 or 49, which is the thermal bridging. So let's say you have an I-joist or a solid wood cross piece there that's, let's say it's 8 inches at 1.41 R per inch, right? So it's got a lot less R value than the insulation beside it. It's not a major thermal bridging concern in attics, at least, but it does have some impact. So if you cover it with insulation, you could argue that you're gaining some thermal resistance in that attic. Just some really food for thought there. Now, walls are different, right? They've done a lot of research, and Joe Steverek over at Building Science, I think one of their papers estimates a 15% decrease in wall thermal performance because of the thermal bridging. If you don't know what thermal bridging is, it's that point where the stud or the steel frame touches the sheathing and is not insulated. Well, there've been some attempts to create products that would just address that one area, right? Like this thermoblock. The problem is this stuff is super expensive. It's $1 last I could find out was $1 per square centimeter, and so that product is still in development and hasn't been updated, and I haven't seen any commercially available versions of products like this. If you know of any, please send me a link to them because I'd love to look into them. In the meantime, I think you're familiar with exterior insulation systems. I wanted to bring up DuPont styrofoam because they've taken over this brand. I believe it used to be the Dow brand, and they have this product called CladMate, which is an advanced styrofoam system, and they've tied it in with their wrap system so that all of their products now work together. So you can have a cladding system that will address thermal bridging, and at the same time you can use their familiar wrap products to address water and air infiltration. And these were the sort of bleeding edge technology I wanted to mention to you, which is vacuum sealed thin panels. The advantage to these would be for something like that thermal bridging or on the exterior of a building is they are thin, right? So a 1.5 inch panel is R12, 2.5 is R19. They're great for certain applications, certainly for commercial buildings, but again, the cost right now is high. However, there is technology in the works. It's called modified atmosphere insulation, and this could make these types of panels more affordable. They achieve a very similar performance, and you can read here how they do it. They seal them with suck all the air out of the panels and seal them. So this is the same type of technology they use in things like refrigerators, and they have for years and years. They haven't quite pulled it off for houses yet, but it could be a game changer. It could be, I guess, what you'd call a disruptive technology if they do get it down to a price point that people can accept. Here's another interesting piece of research that came out about insulation. As the temperature gets colder, some types of insulation get better, meaning they perform better, and some perform worse. Notably, polyisocyanurate actually performs worse as the temperature drops. So it's interesting because I see a lot of polyiso, especially on commercial buildings. I've seen it on a lot of roofs. I think it's worth taking a look at this. Building Science Corp has some stuff on it. It's some data that might make you think a little bit more about what's your climate. Is it appropriate for polyiso products? Interestingly, fiberglass bats actually did better as the temperature dropped. So it was an unexpected sort of new revelation about how insulation performs in different climates. So I guess the reason I brought up all that stuff about insulation thickness is this first one, focus on good insulation. And when I say good insulation, think about the air sealing stuff we talked about with, we're going to look at more at air sealing systems. Air sealing has a 40% impact on your insulating, like overall wall value insulation. So if you're getting a 40% impact, you really want to focus on that more than that maybe 1% impact you're getting when you're adding our levels of insulation up towards those higher levels. Let's talk about air sealing. So if you go to the builder show like I do, you're kind of overwhelmed with the number of air sealing options. You see all these pretty blue boards and these pretty green boards, and it's hard to know, which way to turn. So let's just walk through them a little bit, sort of one at a time, and I'll give you a few pros and cons. Okay, this is LP Weather Logic, and the last I heard, there's actually a lawsuit going on right now where I believe Zip Panel has filed a lawsuit against them for possible copyright or patent infringement. Don't know where that stands. Don't know if there's any grounds to it, but I want to mention it because it is a neat looking product. I actually had a big tour at the show, and they showed me, all the details. It's funny, this particular photo was the one weakness that I saw in the product was if in the demo that they had water running down the side of it, but they didn't have the flashing system installed at the show. So it was good to see how it looks. So it's a fairly elaborate wrap system that has to happen where the foundation overlap is. If you don't have that, then you get a wicking effect of water up into the panels. So I guess my only thought on this is it's not quite as slap and dash and you're done as you might think. These panels have to be carefully taped, and especially in places you can see there's flashing underneath the bottom tape, so the tape wraps up around, and then you've got additional flashing. It's the detailing, and then you have to sort of calculate what kind of laborers do you have. Are they up to this level of detailing? Will your guys follow through with this? Because it is the tape on any panel system is the last line of defense, right? So you've got your panels butting, you've got your tape. The tape has to be put on right. That's one of the major differences between these wall board systems and like a Tyvek or Type R type system. Self-adhesive membranes, of course, they are quite a bit more expensive than the nail-on variety. They do have some labor savings because you don't have to. You're not nailing them, right? You're not taping them. They act as their own tape. They come in a lot smaller pieces though than a house wrap. Like they're only, I think the maximum on these is 48 inches wide. The other thing is you do want to make sure that the surface is dry and clean. If you've got the right conditions, it's a great way to, and you've got a crew that knows what they're doing, it's a great way to save some time, get the stuff on without a lot of extra steps, and not have a tape-dependent system. So you can still get good performance and sort of have that fail-safe of an overlapping system. This is a Fortifiber, which is owned by Henry, by the way, which is one of our sponsors. Okay, these liquid applied systems are interesting. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, sort of the labor saving on these, but the labor saving is really dependent on the house detailing. So, if you've got wider than optimal gaps between sheathing boards, If you've got corners that aren't finished properly, they may not be as sort of speedy and time-saving as you think. Also, they have to be put on at the right thickness. You can't, again, have an unskilled laborer who's never done it just slap them on there. They have, if you read the manual, they have this, like this product, Stogard, I believe, is a 25 mil thickness is recommended. DuPont also has a version of these sort of liquid applied ones called fluid applied WB. So, there's pros and cons to this. You may also end up caulking some of those seams too. It depends how wide the gaps are, and so you get into other systems that sort of are supporting systems to the rolled on. It is a little more pricey than house wrap, also about 30%. Wraps, we do a brand survey every year, and it used to kind of baffle me why sort of the familiar names like Tyvek always came out on top in the brand survey. But we were talking with some of their people the other day, and it sort of hits all the buttons, which is it covers the material covers large areas, right? It is, and also, when I say fool resistant, it's not foolproof, but we all know that sometimes we can't get the best labor or our guys don't do the greatest job. Tyvek is forgiving in a lot of ways, which is it's naturally overlapping like shingles, and so it's not tape dependent. And of course, they have this formula that they've had for years, which keeps out bulk water but allows water vapor to pass through. So, they've got the right chemistry too. One thing I put in this logo because this might seem unfamiliar to you, but they have changed their logo recently. So if you start seeing a little bit different, it may not even strike you that it's different, but on the corporate level, I'm sure this is a major shift for them, but that's their new logo, and they have a new warranty. And the warranty, because they've got this styrofoam product now extends over all of their wrap products, which is, it's specifically for builders too, which I like. A lot of warranties only extend to the homeowner. This one actually goes to builders. So yeah, wraps are solid. I mean, they're relatively affordable in terms of when you compare them with other systems, and they're a known entity, and they can get you, like I said before, to that low air change per hour number that you need to get to, even if you're building net zero. Here's another interesting development: is a lot of the companies are now getting into water management in a sort of almost a commercial. Even though these are products that are used on both residential and commercial, they're bringing out products that specifically manage water. And I think they're seeing, a lot of this extreme weather that's happening and this wind-driven rain on the coast, and they're sort of they're heading off any potential problems in certain areas that just get a ton of rain. You'll notice the Tyvek system goes over their house wrap, so it's almost like a second wall of armor. I believe the Weather Smart, which is a Henry product, is a nailed-on product and doesn't have any other backer behind it. This may be, one of the reasons that some of the drainable stuff. After these storms, there's been a lot of post-mortem after some of these wind events in like North Carolina and Florida and the South. Though that's a vinyl siding wall, and FEMA is actually investigating. There were a huge number of vinyl siding blow-offs. And nobody wants, and especially insurance companies, really aren't going to want to see this kind of damage after storms. And if they do see this kind of damage, it's not that expensive of a repair if you have a backup system. So I think some of these rain shields make a good backup system. If you are going to use vinyl, we usually recommend something else like fiber cement or a EIFS system or something that's a little more hardy in those areas. But at least you don't water soak the house by having these the second line of defense. So zero net energy homes I mentioned again because any of these ceiling systems can get you there. So they have to be done right. Even with Tyvek, you want to that in that case you would want to tape all the seams. I mean, normally you would anyway. There's just a little more detailing if you want to get to that 2 ACH energy performance of net zero. So any system can get you there, and it sort of depends on how much you want to spend, what kind of labor is available, and do you trust your crews, because you need to have some fairly skilled people to do the more advanced systems. I want to talk about HVAC a little bit now. So this is my third area that's changing quite rapidly. Natural gas it's interesting because the price of natural gas keeps dropping, and the promotion from natural gas is that it's the clean energy. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that natural gas, this is the time of transition for natural gas, not the time to ramp up for natural gas appliances and heating. Heat pumps have just gone through the roof, like literally, and I think they grew a little too fast too soon. I think they're just playing catch up now, and I'll talk about that. I want to talk about solar parity, which is something that's just recently happened and is a huge game changer for the industry, for housing in general. And the reason I want to talk a little bit about pollution is it's affecting the equipment that people want in their houses. So people say that the natural gas is the clean gas, but we have to keep in mind 67% of U.S. gas comes from fracking. And I can give you 100 examples of why fracking is just a bad idea. Not, starting with, polluting our freshwater aquifers and on and on. And I don't know if you've seen the crack in the Washington Monument, but that was ultimately linked to fracking somewhere nearby in Virginia, caused a mini earthquake and caused the National Monument to crack. And that sort of was symbolic to me of, hey guys, maybe we need to back off in this fracking a little bit. I do want to give credit though. Gas, it's an incredible fuel. It has been. It's great. I have it in my house as a transition too, because it is the cheapest form of heating, especially in these cold climates, until we can get to the point where we can switch over to a renewable, electric type of heating, and we are getting close. We jumped the gun. We tried to get there a little too soon, but we are getting close. That's because the solar cost parity, and I'm going to get into that in a second. All right, so this is like a picture taken in my neighborhood. This is what's happening all over the place. So you get these landlords, and all of a sudden, they've got oil burners or gas burners in the basement, and they've got 3 units, and they go out and they slap on 3 heat pump compressors on the side of the building, and it becomes sort of a cacophony of noise out there. So it becomes a little bit loud. And then the other thing is they turn them on and they leave them at the same temperature all year. And we get down to -6 in Portland. And all of a sudden you've turned it into basically an electrical resistance heater, and you're paying $300, $400, $500 a month for an electric bill when you used to pay $120 and then get a gas bill for $60. So you can actually, a lot of people I think got into trouble expecting too much of the first generation of heat pumps. And so fortunately, there's a lot of smart people and engineers out there working on heat pumps because they see this market going insane, and they're developing new technology. So this one's it's a Carrier Infinity 20 heat pump. So this one, for example, has a variable speed fan, and it operates at colder temperatures. It goes down, I think, comfortably, still efficient even into the teens. The reason you have a variable speed fan is the first generation, the heat pumps kick on. So they're super quiet. They're like 50 decibels when they're running, once they're running, but they kick on a little louder, and it's the kicking on, especially if you've got 4 or 5 of them in a row, like a lot of these apartment buildings, you've got them kicking on at different times in different series. So it caused a lot of NIMBY sort of reactions from neighbors. getting upset about them and so on, some justifiably, some not so justifiably. But at any rate, the manufacturers have heard them. And it's not just Carrier. I mean, a lot of other companies are making variable speed units now. So you want to look for a variable speed unit, and you want to look for one that has low temperature capability. I have heard that there are some that can go into the minus numbers now. I couldn't tell you which brand specifically, but if you do some research, and I'm sure maybe even Carrier's working on that too, is to get them so they can perform lower. But here's another thing I would say is don't sell heat pumps at this point as year-round heating devices. Sell them as shoulder season devices. So you will heat your home all fall and all spring with these beautiful heat pumps, and then we will heat during the dead of winter with this gas system. Gas is the transitional system. What do we need to do to get there, to get beyond gas? Well, we're really getting there, and this is why I want to show you this graphic. Solar parity. So fossil fuels, total cost per kilowatt, about 5 cents kilowatt hour. Solar energy, now 0.029. Now, even at its lowest price, natural gas rarely ever goes below 0.03 per kilowatt hour. So essentially, solar energy has now beat all the fossil fuels. So to me, that just says it's just a matter of time before our energy grid will convert to solar. You might think that's pie in the sky thinking, but let me show you what's going on. Okay, so Crystal River, Florida. If you know Crystal River at all, there's a giant nuclear plant there, and I think two coal plants, or maybe, yeah, I think there were two. I think the coal plants are both closed. So is the nuclear plant. So what they did a few years ago, they built 2 natural gas plants that produce, I think, 850 megawatts each or something. This is the first big solar development in the area. It's only going to produce, I think, about a fourth of one of those natural gas plants. But it's a huge step, and it's right in the same area where these giant facilities are that are fossil fuel oriented. And you can see the writing on the wall. If they're willing to invest this much money into this project, this is just the beginning. In fact, on the other side of Florida, let's see if I have that one. Oh, no, actually, there's one. Jinko Solar has another big field on the other side of Florida in Jacksonville. NV Energy just announced that they are going to do a huge solar field, the 690 megawatts. So that's almost as powerful as a natural gas plant. But what's different about this one, it's going to have battery storage. So that means instead of running 25% of the time, it can operate 65% of the time. It's going to be the largest solar plant in the U.S. NV Energy also has programs where they help you optimize your building. So, they've combined optimization programs with the introduction of solar and alternative energy. Now, if you remember, Nevada had quite a bit of pushback against solar for a while there, but they've fully embraced it now. And Nevada's, I think, a place to watch, and NV Energy specifically as a progressive utility that's really taking on the solar thing. What's coming are solar-powered heat pumps. There's a couple brands out there right now. There's small companies. It's like one's called the DC10. But I've actually talked to several of the big firms and asked them when are the solar-powered heat pumps coming. The problem with solar-powered heat pumps is because the sun is not reliable, you need a power system that's variable. So you're feeding that heat pump, every time the sun goes behind a cloud, that heat pump has to respond, like drop way down to a low level and then come way up. Or you need a battery system that helps the heat pump maintain a steady level. And that's probably the more likely scenario. So the battery systems are always the problem, but they are addressing these. And I think you're going to see fairly soon affordable, very efficient, solar direct heat pump systems from the major manufacturers. Pollution is on the rise. There's a lot of research about how bad pollution is for you now too, and I think that's feeding consumer awareness. The wildfires certainly have had a major impact on this. I mean, if you look at some of California's air ratings over the past years, they've been terrible. So what's happening is people have no place to flee except into their houses. And we know from historically, indoor air is often toxic unto itself because no one uses their range hoods, unfortunately. So there's a great white space opening for whole house filtration systems that actually deal with the air pollution that's coming into the home. And they actually do work. They even did studies in Beijing that showed that these filtration systems, the good ones like the HEPA filters and the MERV filters, can take most of the contaminants out of the air. So these are cities from last year that had, these are the most polluted cities in the U.S. You see, not many people escaped. I mean, for some reason, Florida didn't make the cut, but that's a good thing. When you talk about what to filter, you get to the smaller particles and they actually get more dangerous in terms of human health. So this is another Carrier product. It's a MERV 15. That's part of their Infinity series whole house filter system, and will basically take everything down to 0.3 microns out. So you need to, if you're going to upsell this like to a client, it's an asthma issue. There's asthma all over the country. There's been a spike in it over the past 10 or 15 years. I think part of it is because people spend 90% of their time inside, but that's a whole different issue. But these filters are, other than fixing the pollution problem, they are the next best thing, and I think they're sort of essential if you want to live healthily, especially in metro areas. These are areas that have high incidence of asthma. So the darker areas are places that have reported increasing numbers of asthma sufferers. So again, most of the country does not escape. So I'd say if you're in one of those dark blue areas, then that's probably your market for upselling a air filter system. Okay, next topic is near and dear to my heart. Smart home. I used to be the editor of Custom Builder magazine years ago, and I remember there was a guy named Steve, and he ran one of those media companies that put in the high-end smart home systems, and they were amazing, but they cost a fortune, and it was really the domain of millionaires, was to have smart systems. And I remember the guys putting them in with the hundreds, standing in the closet with the hundreds of wires and, baffling everyone, including the homeowner, of how the system was going to work. And now it's such a no-brainer that the smart products are literally on the shelf at Lowe's now. Now, I wouldn't say that means that everything's fixed and they've solved every problem. They haven't. A lot of the systems don't talk to each other. There's still, and they can't seem to agree on, which ones should be compatible. I recently tested, for example, Z-Wave, and some products work with Z-Wave and some products don't. We're working pretty closely with Samsung right now, and they have sort of their own protocol that plays nicely with some other systems. But be that as it may, what I want to point out is, look at the 2019 shipments and then the estimates for the 2023 shipments of these smart home gadgets and things, right? And I say gadgets, but I'm going to actually change my tune on that in a minute, because we're actually moving away from gadgets and into assistants. So these things are actually becoming useful finally, and there's been a lot of frivolous uses for these, but let me touch on that. First of all, like this is you may know these Wemo switches, just one example. There's lots of different brands of this. This is Belk and Wemo. They give you instant feedback now. There's a thing called a kilowatt you may have seen. You plug it into the wall, you could stick a lamp in, and it would tell you how much power you're using. Well, this is like that to the nth level. So you could stick 5 of these all over your house, and you can then look at what you're using right now for power, what you used this month, how much it averages when it's on, you can get all kinds of information. And the reason this is important is there's been a lot of research that shows people don't change their behavior unless you can sort of introduce game theory, where they're sort of competing with themselves. So by putting these gadgets in people's houses, or these nice feedback loops, they then can say, they look at their bill, they say, wow, I'm using a lot of electricity, let's get that down, let's see how far I can get that down next month. And you start to actually get some positive change. Now the next level of that is these products. Fin and Flow are two competing products, both of whom we've featured in our magazine and that sort of thing. They both work similarly. What they do, and if you're not familiar with them, they take an algorithm from every device that uses water in the house, and once they have the algorithm, it's like a pattern that device produces. Then you can go to your smartphone and you can tell how much water every single device in the house is using at any time. It will also alert you if, for example, if a sink starts leaking. But see, that's the sort of surface level stuff. But the other thing that's the deeper level, it allows you to passively monitor the behavior in the home. So, for example, it has application for senior citizens. If you have a mother-in-law apartment and you don't want cameras spying on your aging parents, you put in a fin and you look at your phone and you say, Mom has only flushed the toilet once today at 2 o'clock. She normally flushes it 3 times by now. Maybe there's a problem. This is the kind of passive monitoring. I find it less creepy than things like, surveillance cameras, and I think the elder citizens find it a lot less creepy. They're much more willing to engage in a passive way, saying, yes, you can monitor my water use to keep an eye on me. I don't want you listening in or watching me with cameras. So it opens up a lot of possibilities for, especially for, people aging in place and staying in their homes and that sort of thing. There's also a lot of other things coming along, and these are more advanced sort of Wi-Fi, I won't say gadgets, but devices. This is called a Wallabot. You mount it on the wall, and instead of having to wear a clapper or a wrist item, if your mother falls, it can alert you, it can call you, you can have any number of different responses from it. The house itself becomes part of the solution. So this is from our most recent issue, and I spent a ton of time on this thing because I did a lot of interviewing and researching and trying to find all the best electronic gear that's out there to see what would actually be helpful if you wanted to make a house for someone who is approaching the frail age and would otherwise be in an assisted living facility. Could you create an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, that had these features in it that would allow them to stay home for 5 years longer? And that may not sound like much, but it's if you could buy 5 years, the going price at some of these assisted living centers is $25,000 a month for one person. So, what's 5 years worth, just not just on an emotional cost, but from a financial perspective. So I'm not going to go through this graphic with you, but I encourage you to download our May-June issue and read up on it, because it's a whole new sort of world out there, a white space, and I think for builders especially, to start offering senior-friendly assisted living, whatever you want. I call it assisted living technology housing that really has all of the things they need, and the people who care for them to keep an ear on them, keep a phone, a passive monitoring system, make sure that they're safe, but at the same time, let them have their privacy and not get hurt. And the final area I wanted to touch on is that this zero net energy revolution. I say revolution, right now it's a small revolution because there's only a few thousand sort of official zero net energy homes, most of them in California, 7,000 that are multifamily, but California is changing the rules, and they are expected to add another 100,000 new zero net energy homes when those rules change, I believe in 2020. here's what's happening, and Mike, if Mike wants to comment on this at the end, he may have some other insights. We have a sort of a triangulation with the different energy codes. So the new 2021 IECC code is up for final vote this fall. Then ASHRAE 90.1, which is another one that affects this energy performance, is due out this year. And a lot of cities are taking matters into their own hands. And this is where I think it may be even the biggest story. And I listed Washington, Vermont, New York, and some other cities. They're allowed to do these stretch codes where they essentially say, you know, if you're going to build a house, it has to be net zero. We need 2 air changes per hour, period, right? So that could happen in your jurisdiction anytime. So my suggestion is, why not build that way now? It's not that much harder, especially if you're building at 5 air changes an hour. How much harder is it to knock a couple off and get down closer to this kind of performance? California has just mandated solar panels on new housing. I think it kicks in next year, the 2020. Every new house has to have a solar array on it. That, usually as California goes, so goes the nation. So I think you'll see that probably it'll get picked up on the East Coast first, and then eventually it'll drift inwards. I mean, often the southern states are very slow. I mean, some of the deep south states have not yet even adopted up from 2006. IRC. So it's not all going to happen at once, but it will get here eventually. There's different ways. Say you want to build net zero. I just wanted to mention this because you might not be familiar with it at all. HERS, you know, the sort of, in a general sense, if you want to, sort of determine where your homes are, if you get a 0 on a HERS rating, essentially you are building net zero. But, you know, there are critics of HERS because it's a system that compares it to another reference home. That's how they determine what your score is. That doesn't include the actual home size or the actual energy use. So some people don't like HERS. I mean, I think it works in certain situations because it is simple, and you know, people are familiar with it. Realtors are familiar with it, so it certainly has its perks. Energy performance scores are a little more precise. They estimate the actual energy use of the building, include the size, and the score can be 0 to 200. I'm not sure on that one whether you'd have to get as low as a 0 to be considered a net zero energy. It may be slightly different with that type of scale. There's also, and if you want a copy of this presentation, let me know, and I'll send it to you. These are live links that I borrowed from Zero Energy Project. All of these are formal net zero energy certification programs. If you have, if you're already building close to it and you want to get certified, it could be in both a marketing tool and a way to sort of jump ahead of the curve on codes issues. So when the codes do change, you can just say, hey, I've been doing this for 5 years, and you're off the hook. We also have a website called Code Watcher, and we launched it 3 or 4 years ago, and it's been doing great. We're becoming sort of one of the authorities on building codes and code changes. And Mike Klingon, who hosts this event today, is a fantastic wealth of knowledge on codes. So you can always email him directly as well, and he can give you sort of the gritty details that the editors sometimes miss, but we try to keep up on stuff as much as we can, and you can sign up for the newsletter there and get weekly code updates of relevance to you. It's pretty good. I actually read them every day, and Katie O'Keefe is the editor and puts it in. That's me down the bottom on the right with all the sponsors. This is our 2019 grand winning Home of the Year. Another net zero house, and the reason I pulled it up is almost every one of our award-winning, I think maybe with one exception, houses this year in our Green Home of the Year Awards competition were zero net energy houses. So that's actually the first time that's happened. I mean, they've always been well-built, beautiful houses, but it's almost become the norm at the high level of building. And these are different price points. I mean, none of them are what I call inexpensive starter homes, but they're not all mansions either. So zero net energy is the way of the future, and it's at least in the high end of the sort of more progressive builder market, it is already here. And I'm going to wrap it up there. I hope that everybody got something out of this, and I'd be happy to share a PDF of the presentation with you, after this, later on today or whenever. If you can email me, or you can email Mary Kestner at Green Builder Media. Her email is mary.kestner, Kestner, at greenbuildermedia.com. And Mike, I think I will hand it back to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, sir, and thank you for the kind words earlier. We do have a couple of questions, Matt, and the first one comes in from Brian. Now, this came in a while ago, so we're going to have to go back into the earlier part of the presentation. He was referencing a slide that you were showing, and he was asking, well, isn't this slide for 1,000 square feet of wall area instead of ceiling? And his follow-up question to that was, does that make a difference? So this was pretty early on.
Was it the one with the 2006 IRC? Does he think that was it?
I believe it was.
Okay, let me see if I can find that back here. Oh, right there, right. Yeah, no, that is that is if that's the one he's talking about, that is ceiling insulation. So if you see. It says down below, it says recommended Department of Energy attic insulation levels for fiberglass, mineral wool, and cellulose at about R3 per inch. So that's what I was talking about. Like, do you, once you get up to R40, once you've got 18 inches of insulation at, R49, are you really gaining, do you really need to go any deeper, where I see people saying, I got R58 in the ceiling. Does that really gain you anything? And I find it questionable that the gain is really worth it at that point. Okay,
that's fine. Yeah, that was right about that point where he was asking that question. And so I did want to get to just a couple of other things, because I know we're past the top of the hour, and I appreciate everybody for sticking around a little bit longer. Carlos, we got to your question about the slides are going to be available. So that's good news for all who have asked about that. Carlos did, and so did David. So I had a question for you, Matt. In looking at your smart home tech slide, you were talking about market share and shipments and that sort of thing. I was confused about one thing, and I figure if I'm confused about it, others will be too.
Right.
On your chart, you talked about, I'm going to wait till you get, there you go. So down on the video entertainment row, you have the 2023 shipments going up, but market share dropping. So I'm curious as to how that works.
I'm looking at, where do you see, so I see the 2023 market share is 30.5. Oh, from the, I think what they've probably done there is divided, have they divided the total market share up from the other devices as well? Let's see. Yeah, because if you look at, isn't that, I think if you added that up, is that anywhere near 100? The total market share, right? So it adds up to 100, right? So you can only have. So what happens is, it looks like some gain and some like home monitoring goes. The market share for home monitoring security goes up. I think what it is the video. What's happened is video has maxed out. They've saturated. And I think that video entertainment has been driving the bus for a long time. But I think at that point, these other newer technologies, meaning more new, meaning they're new to consumers, will start to eat the lunch of the more familiar ones that are all sort of the mature technologies. Right. I think that's what that's suggesting.
Yeah. No, and that's a good point, and I appreciate you pointing that out to me. And I think part of feeding into that is also mobile devices, right? So you're maybe not installing as much video entertainment hardwired into the house as much as it is wireless, or it's simply I'm looking on my phone instead of a big screen or whatever it is. But I appreciate you clarifying that for me. One other question I had, and I'm going to put the final call out to our audience to send in any last questions you might have. You talked about ICFs and you talked about SIPs early on. Can you share just a little bit about your thoughts on panelized construction? Because we talked about material availability.
Yeah, panelized construction is certainly a viable. One of the things that we've experienced, I'm going to put it back to the SIPs there for a minute. We've actually done some projects with panelized type, builders. The problem with panelized is you have to have a space to build these things, because what they tend to do, and it takes a fairly large operation. And what we've discovered, for example, we like the idea of doing sort of like what the manufacturer or the modular home builders do, creating a model and bringing it out. But they've got, most of these companies are well established. It's really hard to start a new modular system, because putting together sort of the factory and then all of the transportation aspects of it is quite a daunting task. And we actually, crunched the numbers on it. We were doing the Casita project last year, and the company that we were working with had deep pockets in the beginning and empty pockets in the end, because they had to build a factory that was capable of building 3 panelized units at a time, but then you can't achieve the volume that you need to make the whole factory work. So it's sort of a catch-22, is in order to get the volumes, that's why these modular companies, the only reason they can do it is they have big enough spaces, and they've worked out the overhead enough that they can mass produce. And that's also why you don't see a lot of variation. A lot of these modulars, and I spent a lot of time in Florida, and I know when you visit the manufactured home facilities, the buildings themselves are not that different, because it costs them every time they make a change. So they're mass producing. I like the quality of I think panelized construction can be fantastic quality. It's the economics of it for the smaller builder, especially, that are very daunting.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And I don't see any other questions that have come in. I've seen a couple comments come in that I've promised people I will make sure to get those comments to you, Matt, so that you can follow up with each of those attendees privately and separately afterwards.
Sure. Yep. Great.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Matt. I really appreciate you doing this webinar for us today. Any final thoughts from you?
No, thank you all, and I look forward to hearing from you. And if you've got some projects going that you think are cool, and that our other readers and your peers would like, feel free to send them in to me, and we'll take a look.
All right, the call has been put out there. I also need to say thank you, not just to our audience who always shows up and always asks great questions, but also to our sponsors. And again, they are DuPont, Carrier, Premier Sips, PowerShift by NV Energy, and Henry Company for their generous sponsorships. Thank you once again for that. Our next webinar is going to occur in about a month. It's going to be July 23rd, to be precise. We're going to be joined by 2 returning guests, Shauna Mozingo and Jim Myers. And we're going to be talking about the IECC code hearings that took place about a month and a half to 2 months ago. We're going to highlight some of the code change proposals that were submitted. Some received recommendations from the code committee and some did not. So tune in on Tuesday, July 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern Time for that discussion. Until then, I hope everyone has a safe, relaxing, and happy 4th of July, and we'll see you next time. Take care.